day of ASEAN High-Level Symposium on Disaster Management. Yesterday, we had excellent remarks from the Secretary General of ASEAN, also from the Ambassador of People's Republic of China to ASEAN, as well as a very insightful keynote speech from the chair of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Disaster Management. Also, yesterday, we had 3 amazing thematic sessions which discuss issues of disaster management ranging from policy making, early warning systems, to strengthening communities. Today, without further ado, we will start with our 4th thematic session about advancing disaster risk financing and insurance to enhance regional economic resilience. I would like to invite our moderator for this session, Mr. Ki An-Nguyen, Director of Sustainable Development of the ASEAN Secretariat. Please give a big round of applause. I would like to also invite 4 awesome panelists for this session. Mr. Tahini Tamagoda, Head of Regional Office for Asia and Pacific, European Commission Director General for European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations, or ECO. Mr. Suprayoga Hadi, Indonesia National Planning Agency. Ms. Elkan Chin, Head of the Insurance, Funds and Infrastructure Finance Division, Monetary Authority of Singapore. Mr. Butch Meili, President of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, or PDRF. Ladies and gentlemen, here are the moderators and the panelists for this session. Mr. Ki An-Nguyen, you may start this session. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ki An-Nguyen. Let's call me Kian. I'm a Director for Sustainable Development Directorate within the ISCC Department of ASEAN Secretariat. I'm very happy to be, and my pleasure to be a moderator for this very important session. And just before we're going to start, let me go a little bit of introduction of the session, what is this about, and the introduction of the esteemed speakers we have here today, and then the program will be open for the speaker to start with. So this section talking about the advancing disaster risk financing and insurance to enhance regional economic resilience. So that will address the benefit and the limitation of disaster risk financing and insurance as part of comprehensive disaster risk management strategies. The session seeks relevant recommendations to strengthen the long-term financial architecture of ASEAN and economic situation in ASEAN against natural disaster, as outlined in ASEAN Vision 2025. It's also focused on innovative policy to enhance disaster readiness of multinational corporation and SME. So I think this is very much talking about finance issues relating to the business sectors and how to increase the financial resiliencies of the community following the ASEAN Vision 2025, especially both covering the economic and the social culture community. So this will have, this session will run from expectedly from 9:05 until 9:45. So roughly you have 40 minutes of presentation. And then we have Q&A starting from 9:45 to 10:25. So we have roughly about 40 minutes of Q&A. So quite a lot, lengthy Q&A. So I expect quite a lot of questions coming out from the audience. Then we have roughly about a couple of minutes for closing and wrap up. I hope this is shorter because this is going to be my role. So anyway, this is the program will run until 10:30. So we have 4 speakers here today. So each of us maybe probably will have about 10 to 15 minutes of presentation, and then we'll go for one go. And once we end of the 4th presentation, then we'll open the Q&A for the session. But before we start, let me quickly introduce our esteemed speaker here. First of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Tahini Tamanagoda from, I try to pronounce it, I hope it's correct. She is currently a head of regional office at the European Commission Directorate General for European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operation. Is quite lengthy. Yeah. So in short, we call it ECHO, based in Bangkok. Her professional experience over the last 20 years cover a wide range of geographic area: Middle East, Balkan, the Caucasus, Northern Africa, and Asia. And her related experience cover quite a big thing from early action to disaster risk management, community-based, school-based disaster risk management, conflict-sensitive, do no harm programming in fragile and disaster-prone context, as well as issue relating to protracted emergencies, natural disaster, and post-recovery setting. Ms. Tahini earned a bachelor degree from Lancaster University in UK, and also the master from King's College in London. So this, please welcome Ms. Tahini. And the second speaker is Dr. Supayoga Hadi. He's a very experienced professional and we will say structure professional and with career path in Indonesia. He has been holding the past quite a lot of high-profile positions, starting from Director of Special Area and Disadvantaged Region of Ministry of Planning, Deputy Minister of Special Area of Development of Ministry of Disadvantaged Region until 2014, and then he taking the position of Director General of Villages Development of the Ministry of Villages in until 2017, including the other position of Director General of Special Regional Development of the same ministry. He also taking now is a primary planner at the Ministry of National Planning, Development Planning of Bappenas of Indonesia. So apart from a lot of experience with the ministry, he also holding the position of the chairman of the Association of Indonesian Development Planner since November 2018, as well as the deputy chairman of the Association of Indonesian Disaster Experts since June 2017. Thank you, Pak, for spending time with us here. He had the doctorate degree from University of Southern California, focusing on planning and development studies. Thank you, Pak. The third one, I'd like to introduce Ms. Ellen Chin. Ellen joined the Ministry, the Monetary Authority of Singapore in 2004, and she have over 15 years experience in industry development, where she oversaw various portfolio, including talent development, financial research, insurance, and asset management. Ellen lead the insurance, funds, infrastructure finance division, which is responsible for conceptualizing and executing strategy and initiative to develop Singapore as a leading infrastructure financing, fund domiciliation, and risk financing hub in Asia. Welcome, Ali. And the last one of our speaker today, this session, is Mr. Butch Malik. So let me call him is Mr. Butch. I have a very interesting article, and I would like to read in whole. It's a very people-oriented story, and I very much with ASEAN. Butch is the president of Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, in short called PDIF, a private sector disaster management organization that includes many of the major business groups in the country. Philippine Long Distance Telephone, his parent company, received the 2016 Prince of Wales Business in Community UPS International Disaster Relief Prize for his work in mobilizing PDRF during Super Typhoon Haiyan. PDRF currently operates the world's only nascent private sector emergency operations center. Bush is also the president of the Idea Space Foundation, a technology accelerator for early stage startup company. He has QBO Innovation Hub, a public-private partnership launch to mentor startups. He is concurrently president of Pacific Global One, a firm formed by PNDT's aviation group. Previously, Bush was first vice president and special assistant to the chairman of PNDT and president of PNDT Smart Foundation. Prior to joining PNDT, he served as vice president communication for TNC Beatrice International, a food company in New York and Paris. He had worked with several New York public relations firms and a financial startup there. Bush was previously president of the Philippine American Chamber of Commerce and served two three-year terms. Bush is graduate of Ateneo de Manila University. He also has an MA Journalism and Communication from the University of Florida. He was a recipient of the College of Journalism's Alumnus of Distinction Award in 2000. He returned to the UF in 2003 as a Freedom Forum Distinguished Visitor Professor. Welcome, Bush, for the forum. So, without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker to start first. You either can sit here or you can take the podium. We have a studio. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. There should be a yes, exactly. Yes. So, Excellencies, honorable guests, good morning. Let me first introduce a very quick snapshot on who ECHO is. Next slide, please. ECHO is the European Commission's Humanitarian and Civil Protection Directorate General with the mandate to provide humanitarian assistance in outside of Europe, but nowadays also inside of Europe, to conflicts and natural disasters, people affected by both those settings. Next, please. We work with over 200 humanitarian partner organizations that uphold the fundamental principles of humanity, independence, impartiality, and also neutrality. And the assistance is based on the needs rather than any kind of affiliation. The assistance is also very targeted to the specific needs of the communities who are affected. Next, please. As we know, the disasters far overwhelm, hazards far overwhelm the humanitarian budgets that are available. This gives us a quick snapshot for 2020, the humanitarian budget that is projected for this year. It requires $28 billion to serve 108 million people, over 108 million people in need or in over 53 countries. Against this backdrop, we do need to kind of think a different way of how to address the situation. And as humanitarian organizations, we're actually quite forced to do that. Next, please. Asia, as we heard yesterday, the most disaster-prone region globally. This is from 2018, but it still remains valid, if not exacerbated. Next, please. And as I said, we need to rethink of how we operate. Our assistance has been, and the way the humanitarian organizations and actors act after disasters, we are still very much response-oriented. It's not now anymore about disaster preparedness or climate adaptation. It's about really taking that window of opportunity, anticipating a shock before a humanitarian need manifests itself. We need to be proactive rather than reactive. And this is based on what we think is important, is to be based on robust forecasting and agreed upon triggers and SOPs, including financial instruments that can be released, generated long before or as soon as the information is available and can be released to the vulnerable communities. Next, please. So here again, we are looking more at SOPs, early action, and actions that can really support communities. We have, based on our extensive experience towards the ADMA work program on shock responsive social protection, our current action is also to scale up the forecast-based financing and early warning and early action. And thereby we think that we can enhance and contribute to the resilience of the communities in the ASEAN region. Next, please. So the building blocks, what we are basing our experiences on, of course, the forecast-based science that needs to be taken on board. But also we have extensive experience with communities, with early warning systems. So this is a great building block to further build on. It's also about identifying innovative ex-ante financing approaches which are evidence-based and instruments as well. As I said, we work with over 200 humanitarian organizations, and in this region we've been working with organizations really building on their comparative advantages in terms of risk financing and other expertise that they have. And I've mentioned a few here, like FAO, WFP, IFRC, and many of the colleagues are also here in this room. What we are also aiming to achieve is to open up the conversation to a broader number of stakeholders, to break away from the silos and the different disciplines, from climate science and vulnerability analysis or social protection versus risk reduction. It's really to open up this dialogue. And we also see that the opportunity in the strong and binding ASEAN DRR work program, where we could see a policy change taking place as the new policies work program is being updated. Next, please. So expectations is more strengthen interagency collaboration. It's also to build a regional knowledge management platform on forecast-based action that's ultimately also owned by ASEAN in order to help the policy dialogue. Also a joined-up vision on how diverse forecast-based mechanisms at country level could complement the broader DRM framework. And then also at more country level, agreed upon specific risk financing strategies and prioritizing the different tools as well. Next, please. A second example comes from the Philippines actually as well, where we see that there is actually 5% of the funding is put at local government level for disaster preparedness and response. So it's not about absence of resources. There are resources available. And in this action, in the Move Up action, which we focused was on Metro Manila, more on the extreme vulnerable communities, trying to see how we can link them up to different financing tools and insurance schemes amongst the poorest community members. Next, please. And we came up with some practical opportunities and challenges around through our experience. The government of Philippines provides a perfect and strong mandate for risk financing, including insurance. And there's also a recognition amongst insurance companies to see to reach out to a different clientele base. At the same time, we also understood that the poor communities, they had a certain willingness to contribute to certain financial schemes as well, despite their poverty level. However, where we did see the challenges was that even though local government units were willing and committed, the regulatory framework was still very much restrictive. It required a disaster declaration for the disaster resources to be released, and that in itself was a barrier. So even if you had disaster preparedness, you had the measures put in place in the policy frameworks, there were no clear guidelines and protocols how we can utilize this prior to a disaster, prior to a humanitarian need that manifolds itself. And this is what we are trying to address and aim for as well. The other part was also, there was from the insurance companies, there was also, despite their willingness and recognition, they were also very reluctant to have schemes when in high-risk areas. So that was one of the challenges there as well. Limitations, one of the questions was about limitations on risk financing. Next, please. Risk financing and forecast-based early action. There's still also a limited understanding of the different financing instruments. There's also, as I said, assistance is very much towards relief rather than preparedness or early action. Post-disaster response is seen as more visible and defensible, forming a barrier to early action. There's also still a mixed understanding on the cost-benefit effectiveness of risk insurance, financing, and early action. And then it's also seen as the risk is acting in vain, which is also a barrier to forecast-based action. But if we can, even if we release it, it still is resilient to the communities. So we should not look at it in that way. My last messages here is the EU has been at the forefront on preemptive actions. It's also embedded in various international frameworks. However, humanitarians cannot work on this alone. We do need development partners. We do need the governments to take on this. We need a political will to make this shift, this paradigm shift, the way we work, the way we think, and to really act. In that way, we could potentially also reduce and increase the resilience. Social protection schemes are a key instrument mechanism. The colleague yesterday mentioned that social protection schemes have the highest impact in terms of poverty reduction. This is what we also see, and we should act on it more ahead of a disaster rather than later, so that we're not too late. Sorry, the next please, and then that's my final conclusion there. Yeah, we believe that disasters is the lack of investment. And climate change and all these other aspects cannot be an excuse for us not to have that political commitment and make this change. With that, thank you, and sorry for taking a bit more longer than.
Thank you very much, Tahini. I think perhaps we will reserve the Q&A session that I presented before to the end of the fourth presentation. Perhaps to save the time, I would like to invite Pak Hadi to start with the presentation about Indonesia case. Pak, you can take the podium or you sit here, up to you, Pak. Silakan, Pak.
Thank you for having me here, Mr. Nguyen, and ladies and gentlemen, good morning. What I would like to share is about actually twofold of presentation. One is the introduction actually on how the Indonesian government is very much trying to make the disaster resilience as one of our priority agenda at the development planning actually. Because I'm from National Planning Agency. And then the second part is talking about the financing itself, which is related with the priority, why the government put the priority of the disaster resilience just recently actually for the next 5 years. And then it will have some implication actually on the financing scheme that we are now still developing actually, and try to have maybe later on some input from a colleague. Next. So this is actually the thing that very much strategizing actually the challenges of the Indonesian disaster, and now maybe it's quite pity you are now all of us now in the season of disaster actually, the flood, the rainy season, and other kind of hydrometeorological disaster now still happening actually until maybe next month. So prepare for disaster here. So, but in the financing scheme, it is very much struggling actually, mostly developing countries. And I heard that from Taini that in the Philippines, but that's 5%. But in Indonesia, is still struggling actually to having 1% actually from the national budget to be allocated for the disaster risk, which is still in the approaching actually 1%. Which is quite high actually in terms of, but we are still following the global platform or global commitment from the UNHCR actually in approaching 1%. Next. So okay, and I think Senda is very clear that investing in DRR is one of the priority. Next. Okay, this is actually the introduction itself. So now in 2020 2024, Indonesia already been very much committed that disaster and climate resilience becoming one of the priority agenda. This is the first time in history actually. After independence in 1945, almost 100 year, almost centennial, we have put now the disaster into one of our national agenda actually, the priority. So it's very proudly to present actually in this session. Next. Okay, next. I'll try to keep this introduction. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This one. And then how we try now to make something like a balance actually between pre or post disaster. Maybe the next session, section 5 actually talking about the post disaster. Everybody knows Aceh. Everybody knows like Merapi, everybody knows about the recovery process in Indonesia is very iconic actually. Everybody would like to learn about the Aceh, how the BRR and so on and so forth. But how about the pre-disaster? This is quite interesting to have. Even though in 2011, President SBY has been awarded as a global champion for disaster risk reduction, but not really in the implementation yet. At that time, UNHCR finally appraised Indonesia as one of the global champion. There's only two global champion, I think. Al Gore for the climate change and President SBY for the DRR. But this is still actually one of our challenge actually for having such continuation and also commitment actually to follow this kind of global acknowledgement actually. And this is going to be very, challenging for us for making this quite a balance. We know that for like a flood in Jakarta, maybe it's more than Aceh already. The loss and the what we call the damage. But we're trying to have how to prevent actually. That's just much more important actually. Next. Okay, this is Indonesia is from London to Ankara actually. It's very huge country, and there's the red zone is the prone area. So more than 80% actually already been categorized as a prone area. So the risk is there, the hazard is there. So it's very difficult for us to manage this kind of situation. Next. Okay, and this is actually our plan to how to prevent those kind of risk, and also how to promote the resilience actually in those red zone actually, red not red light actually, red zone of this situation along the islands here. Next, one more slide. Yeah. And this is also already, no, this one. It's already been categorized actually. Some climate type of disaster, geological type of disaster, and it's going to be very scarce actually and varied over the regions actually here in Indonesia. And then we are coming to the next slide, the financing itself. So actually, no, previous, yeah. Actually, there's only two, laws actually related to disaster. One is Disaster Management Law, 2007. And another one is trying to talk about the State Budget Law in 2003 actually. We try to both, combine those law and how it already been implemented actually in Indonesian case. Next. Yeah. And we have been, dealing with this kind of, the generosity actually from donors, from partners, from sponsorship, yeah, since Aceh. There's a lot of grants, some loans actually recently, but mostly grants actually coming to our countries and try to cope with this kind of, recovery process. Plus, how to make it build back better. Maybe you will be meeting Pak Kuntoro, maybe, or Pak Heru after this session. He or they, promote what they call the build back better. So not only trying to recover it to the zero, level, but how to make it better than before. So how to make better? We need to invest in the DRR. So that's why we try to shift actually the commitment from the post-disaster recovery to the pre-disaster prevention and also mitigation. So this is actually the grant now is becoming quite popular actually to promote the risk financing, not the post-disaster financing actually. Next. And we have also what we call the direct grant and also the planned grant, the well plan. Well plan means related with the investment plan on the DDRR. So it's quite different with the post, funding actually, recovery funding. So risk financing and also risk transfer. It's also now it's being developed actually the system itself here in Indonesia. Next, the bonds and so on and so forth. And this is actually the map of how we have already been implementing this kind of risk financing, including the insurance sectorally as well as cross-sectorally. Because we have also the insurance for instance, like for the agriculture, for the fisheries, for the fishermen, also for the farmers, because of the situation of the calamity or the disaster. But it is going to be very much, broadened into the cross-sectoral disaster issues. Next. And okay, this is the risk financing, transfer of the financing, the insurance. Next, and final one. Okay, so actually this is my final slides dealing with this kind of, the potential immediate, measures. And one of the issues is how to actually try to have the disaster and climate resilience through the risk financing actually. This is very, very challenging and going to be very much, related with our national priority in putting the priority of the disaster, environment, carbon clean to be, funded properly and appropriately. And final one, the summary. Next. Okay. One is, of course, the risk is very much, prioritized now. And then financing is going to be quite, also need to be prioritized actually to be allocated, as well as for the risk and also for the resilience. Is going to be good, situation now that we are trying to put our allocation mostly in this, priority program, at least for the next 5 years in the medium-term development plan. So I think that's my conclusion, and maybe later on we can discuss it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Hadi. So after the presentation from EU and Indonesia, perhaps we move on with the next presentation. Ms. Ellen Chin, she will present the case study in Singapore as well as some aspect from ASEAN as a region as well. Ms. Chin, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Eileen from the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And today I'm glad to be here to share more about Singapore's approach, towards boosting disaster risk resilience. So we all know that natural catastrophes is a looming threat, present and clear danger for Asia. Over the last 50 years, Asia already accounted for half of the world's economic losses from natural disasters, amounting to more than 900 billion. Major disasters such as the 2011 Thai floods and Tohoku earthquake, the 2013 Super Haiyan, and the 2018 Sulawesi earthquake and tsunami are timely reminders. Asia's net cat protection gap is set to grow for 3 reasons. First, the frequency and severity of net cat is increasing. The number of net cat events is rising from an average 44 in the 1970s to 146 in the 2000s. This will be compounded by climate change, as we all know, as extreme weather events lead to heat waves, flash floods, and rising sea levels. Second reason is also because the assets and population at risk is rising. There's an increasing concentration of wealth and people in small, overpopulated mega cities. Many of these urban centers are in Asia, located in Philippines, China, India, Japan, Indonesia, and which are highly exposed to natural perils because they tend to lie along coastal as well as low-lying regions. And yet, less than 10% of our economic losses are insured, compared to more than 40% in the developed countries. Next. Currently, the post-disaster measures, including donor aid, grants, government reserves, only covers a fraction of losses. And this is not sustainable. We need to build stronger ex-ante disaster risk financing solutions, such as insurance, risk pools, and insurance-linked securities, to reduce the financial impact of natural disasters. In Singapore, we adopt a value chain-based public-private sector partnership approach to boost disaster resilience in Asia. This involves industry, academia, and policy makers putting in place 4 fundamental building blocks to identify and measure and mitigate the risk exposures in Asia. So if you look at the slide, the first one really entails risk assessment. We need to first measure and quantify the economic and financial impact of natural disasters and include this risk in our overall risk management strategies. Second, capacity building. We need to raise the overall level of awareness, institutional capacity, as well as enabling regulatory and legal frameworks in local countries and businesses. Third, risk advisory. We need to develop more bespoke and tailored solutions and implement more optimal risk financing strategy in response to the different levels of exposures and protections that is required in each individual country. And finally, the last building block is really about expanding, innovating the suite of risk financing solutions, whether is it from sovereign risk pools to insurance to the use of catastrophe bonds to transfer such risks to the capital markets. Because, we need to construct optimal and cost-effective risk management strategies for higher frequency, lower severity disasters like frequent flooding. It is cheaper to use government reserves as well as traditional reinsurance compared to cat bonds, right? And you know, so we need to really build a sort of a holistic risk financing stack and reserve the more expensive instruments like cat bonds for more severe and extreme events. But to do this, we first need to, you know, adopt this value chain approach, because without science, without you know, proper quantification, it's very hard to devise such optimal strategies downstream. Okay, next slide. Talking about Singapore's net cat risk ecosystem, we have a strong ecosystem of reinsurers specializing in property cat risk, a network of brokers with cat risk modeling capabilities, commercial cat modeling vendors and research institutes, and more importantly, we are connecting the dots across this ecosystem and taking a coordinated approach to combat disaster risk. Primarily through 3 key public-private partnership initiatives, which I will talk more about in turn. So the first one is the NetCat data, sorry, next slide. The first one is the NetCat Data Analytics Exchange. We all know that Asia suffers from a data challenge. There's generally a lack of accurate and reliable loss data. If available at all, they are often poor quality and has poor geo-resolution. So there remains, therefore, significant deviation amongst the modeling output produced by these private sector players. And in the case of the Thai floods back in 2011, we have also seen how modeling blind spots could be a problem, you know, where risks are previously thought to be low, and where secondary knock-on effects on supply chains are inadequately captured. Enter NetCat DEX, which is envisaged to be the leading NetCat data analytics platform here, a true PPP that is led by the Institute of Catastrophe Risk Management in NTU and in partnership with industry players such as Aon, MSIG, Renaissance Re, China Re, RMS, Perils, Sinotech, and MAS. We hope that the NetCat DEX can establish data standards to raise the overall NetCat data hygiene levels in the region, and also use technology to, you know, capture cutting-edge satellite imagery and remote sensing data, fuse it with economic exposure and loss data, as well as insurance exposure and loss data aggregated from primary insurers in the region to reflect a more accurate picture of risk. So when completed, we hope that NetCat DEX can be a high-resolution, geo-coded, scientific-driven source of data for insurers, public policy makers, academia, to undertake more robust underwriting and catalyze more innovative risk financing solutions in the region. Next slide. This is just a sample or snapshot of the output of the NetCat DEX platform. And in the initial phase, we are actually focusing on 4 key cities of Taipei, Manila, Bangkok, and Jakarta, and with a view to scale up to the entire region subsequently. Next slide. Let me now move on to the second PPP initiative that we are working on together with our ASEAN colleagues here, which is the ASEAN Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance Program, or ADRIFI for short. Now, the ADRIFI roadmap was first established in 2011 to serve as the regional coordinating platform and policy backbone for ASEAN's disaster risk management efforts, which includes data and modeling, capacity building, and risk advisory initiatives. ADRIFI is special in the way that it draws from 3 stakeholder groups of regulators, finance ministers, as well as the civil defense forces, right? Combining science, policy, and finance together. And it is governed under the auspices of the ASEAN Cross-Sectorial Committee on Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance. So, next slide. The phase 1 work has been completed by the previous project team, and they have basically completed and established a historical socio-economic loss database for 5 ASEAN member states with a number of capacity building programs conducted for the region. We are now, next slide please. We are now in phase 2, and Singapore as ASEAN Chair 2018, we have actually initiated and obtained the ASEAN Finance Minister's endorsement to launch phase 2, and we are now moving on to the key activities of risk assessment, capacity building, and risk advisory. ADRIFI will be run from a dual program office. Okay, NTU and the ICRM will be taking the lead for the risk assessment and risk advisory pillars, whereas the ASEAN Secretariat will drive capacity building programs here in Jakarta. And both ICRM and ASEC are expected to drive an open architecture model, working very closely with external partners, multi-stakeholder groups, including governments, regulators, academia, industry, as well as multilateral organizations. Let me now move on to the third initiative. Next slide, please, which is the SEADRIFT, or Southeast Asia Disaster Risk Insurance Facility. This is really, first of its kind, the first CAT pool in the region in Asia. And it shows and demonstrates a lot about ASEAN solidarity and commitment towards disaster risk resilience. Incorporated and domiciled in Singapore as a general insurer last year, SEADRIFT will initially focus on a flood risk pool covering Laos, Myanmar, potentially Cambodia, and will provide rapid risk financing in the immediate aftermath of an disaster. So the contingency budget will be paid to the government to buy emergency supplies like food, medicine, and to rebuild affected infrastructure to the affected populations. And there are plans to expand the products of SEADRIFT to cover other ASEAN countries, perils and solutions in the future. And already we are talking to a few ASEAN countries to develop a second product, which is potentially a public assets financial protection program to rebuild public assets in the medium and long term. Okay, next slide. The fourth solution that I wanted to talk about is really the insurance-linked securities, which is an alternative risk financing instrument for net cat risk. There's increased interest by Asian countries generally to transfer the more extreme and severe events to the capital markets. And you may actually have read that the World Bank and Philippines, have launched Asia's first cat bond. It's listed in Singapore last year to protect Philippines against tropical cyclones and earthquakes. So again, Asia is innovating, Asia is taking the lead. We are showing the world that we can and do want to tap on different types of risk financing instruments. And the MAS, we are doing our part to also develop Asia as an ILS market. So far, we have sponsored or issued 5 cat bonds in Singapore, including the World Bank Philippines one, the Insurance Australia Group, which covers their multi-perils in Australia, as well as 2 Floridian insurers. So the use cases and applications are very diverse. And in fact, we hope that ILS can also be used for other kinds of severe risks, not just net cat, but also including cyber risks and also possibly pandemics, which is a real possibility given the current situation. So what have we done to establish Singapore as ILS domicile? There are a few building blocks that we need to put in place as well. The first is regulatory framework. So we basically have an existing special purpose reinsurance vehicle, SPRV framework, which allows sponsors and insurers to issue insurance-linked securities in Singapore. And to really speed up the time to market, we have actually introduced a fast-track approach to reduce the processing time from usually 3 months to down to 2 weeks for plain vanilla transactions. You also need an appropriate tax regime to support such instruments, and therefore we have also further enhanced our tax schemes to provide tax neutrality for the special purpose reinsurance vehicle itself, as well as to the ILS investors investing in this kind of instruments. The third is around legal and corporate structures. Currently, ILS bonds can only be established via a normal special purpose vehicle company. But this year we will conduct a feasibility study to review if there's a need to introduce a protected cell company type of structure to support different kinds of ILS instruments, including collateralized reinsurance, multiple deal vehicles, which may find it more cost efficient to use a PCC kind of structure. And lastly, ecosystem. You can't do these kind of transactions without the service providers, the ecosystem players. So to develop a strong pipeline of deals, to help these players build up a strong business case, we have also introduced an ILS grant scheme, which will defray 100% of issuance costs in the first 3 years to really catalyze the development of the ILS market. So we hope that all these initiatives put together can help to deepen our ILS ecosystem and support the development of Asia as an ILS market. Sorry, last slide for me. Just want to highlight the sustainability aspects, because a number of our CAD modeling output today does not include forward-looking long-term climate scenarios, to be honest. We do need to work more closely with industry to really capture this climate risk into our models to support underwriting, pricing, and selection of risk. And therefore, we are doing a lot to boost research in this area, such as working with research institutes like the Earth Observatory of Singapore. And generally, Singapore, we have also committed to the Paris Agreement to reduce carbon emission intensity by 36% by 2030. That's at the national level. And we are introducing a carbon tax as well on large direct emitters of greenhouse gases from last year onwards. Within the financial sector, we expect all companies listed on the Singapore Exchange to produce annual sustainability reports. And for the banks and the insurance sector, they have already adopted global principles, including the UN PRI, UN PSI, and we hope to see more integration into their business and investment decisions. So this is just a parting note to say that when we think about disaster resilience, we also need to think about climate risk resilience together on the same page, to ensure that ASEAN continues on a sustainable and inclusive growth path. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Chins. I think not, but lastly, we would like to invite Mr. Butch for the presentation on the Philippines.
My presentation will last 40 minutes, so I'm sure you won't mind not having your coffee break today. Everyone in the Philippines has a story. My most vivid memory as a young boy was watching as the roof of our home was torn off, and my father ran screaming down the stairs as we watched it. It was the eye of a typhoon, and we were under the impression it was the end, but it was actually just the beginning. If you look at the slide behind me, that is the track of typhoons from 1978 till last year. You'll see that almost the entire country is covered by typhoons. In the last 16 weeks, we have had 3 earthquakes, 2 typhoons, 1 volcanic eruption, and of course, the virus. Next slide, please. The government has made tremendous strides since Super Typhoon Haiyan and since 2009 when PDRF was formed. But what the Philippines also has is a robust, organized private sector. We are set up with these lifeline clusters. Much of the economy is privatized. This is what we think are the essential areas: telecoms, water, power, search and rescue, and of course, finance and insurance. We're working with the insurance industry to promote and to push the penetration rates in the Philippines, because the penetration rates for insurance are extremely low right now. We're also working with micro-insurance companies, microfinance companies, so they can offer micro-insurance, and also so they can offer training in disaster risk reduction to their small business clients. This is important for us, and I think it's important for them because it enables these small businesses to prepare and to recover faster. Next slide, please. We've also built the world's first ever private sector-run National Emergency Operations Center. We built it outside of Manila so that in case Manila is hit by a major earthquake, we can still continue to function. What makes this different, we can monitor the weather, earthquakes, eruptions, and pandemics. But we can also plot the facilities of our private sector members, whether they are cell phone sites, factories, pawn shops, whatever your business is. Some of our businesses compete with each other, so we give them password-protected, encrypted sign-ins, so that Coke doesn't know what Pepsi's doing, one telecom company doesn't know what the other company is doing, but it enables us to track their data and to send help when needed. We also provide a backup center for them in case something happens to their main facility. Next slide, please. How do we expand the network? Through partnerships, both with the government. We have partnerships with the Department of Health, Department of Energy, and several government agencies. In addition, with the help of the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, we have the Asian Preparedness Partnership, which unites civil society, the government, and the private sector. We also have partnerships with Airbnb. You'll see there, they provide pretty nice residences for our relief workers when they go out to help people. Whenever there's an Airbnb available, we're able to make use of it. They give us a $1 limit every year. We also work with DHL in terms of their guarding airports to make them safer program. We're starting that this year. We work with UPS strongly, and of course we work with the Pacific Disaster Center, which provides us the information for the Operations Center in Clark. So we have a number of partners. Next slide, please. One of our flagship programs, though, is helping micro, small, and medium-sized businesses. So it's not just the big companies that need to be prepared, because we realize that many of these companies have outsourced their services, and they need their dealers, suppliers, their clients in order to function. So many of these companies are willing to pay to have their companies in their supply chain undergo business continuity programs. We also have a service continuity program with government agencies to help them continue to operate during a crisis. Next slide, please. Over 90% of the Philippines economy is tied up in small businesses. So it's critical for us to build an ecosystem and to support it with structural platforms such as PDRF to help them operate and to provide innovative approaches. Let me turn to the next slide. We've launched a nationwide initiative, and this includes everybody: civil society, chambers of commerce, government agencies. We're all in this together. We've managed to train over 7,000 small businesses in the country in the last 2 years through this initiative. Next slide, please. However, there are millions of small businesses that we need to reach, and the only way to do so is by using different approaches. With the help of UPS, we've developed an app that the small businesses can use. So that's the high tech. In terms of the low end of technology, we've also developed a comic book with a resilience hero that store owners or business owners can read at their leisure, as well as a guide to disaster resilience that they can read as well. Next slide, please. As my colleague from Singapore mentioned, we've actually availed of the first ever Asian catastrophe bond. $225 million, good for 3 years, through the World Bank. Interest rates are 5.5 to 5.65%. There are certain triggers that will enable payment to the country. But what this does, as she mentioned, it transfers the risk of disasters from the government to investors. And for the Philippines, if I were a gambling man, this is a pretty good bet in terms of this being able to get some of that money back because of the many disasters that hit us. It's something that we've been advocating for a long time, but the government has finally done it, and all kudos to them. And we can sleep safer at night knowing that we've got this catastrophe bond there. But we've also been advocating, as Tahini mentioned earlier, the humanitarian system needs a new source of donors. They cannot rely on the old system. And so we're trying to push for humanitarian bonds. There are a lot of social investors now, social funds. And if we can have a type of bond that's tied to a stream of income, and the money from that bond goes to funding UN and other ASEAN projects, I think that's something that will help in the future. We're also advocating free trade zones in disaster areas with no taxes or low taxes, so that private business will be encouraged to invest in this conflict or disaster areas. Once they do that, they'll bring jobs, they'll bring homes for the people who work there, they'll bring restaurants for the people who live and work there, and it will enable the economy to get going that much faster. Last slide, please. I'd like to end just by saying that there is an untapped resource for ASEAN, and that's the private sector. You can use the resources in all types of situations, before, during, and after a crisis. And that includes today's COVID-19 virus. Working with China, ASEAN can develop an ASEAN-wide response to this threat, and you can tap the private sector. In China, Alibaba is the #1 donor to the containment of the virus. Who delivers food to the people who are quarantined at home except these private motorcycle drivers and private businesses? They bring food to their homes every day and keep them going. So the private sector is essential in this crisis and in others. We are stronger when we are together, and when we work together, we can build a safer, better, newer world for ourselves and for our children.
Thank you, Bush, and thank you all the 4 speakers today. I think this is a much awaited time for us to reflect what George taught and what the idea have been presented today by the 4 presenters. And I think that we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So I would like to open the floor for Q&A session. But before you start raising the question, please identify where you come from and the question going to which speakers, or you just give the general speaker to the one. So I will try to give. Okay, we have one from there and one from the left side. So where the microphone? So we will take 2 questions first, and then after the speaker entertain and respond, then we will go for another set of questions. Please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator, for giving me a floor. First of all, let me congratulate and thank you so much for all the panelists for your comprehensive presentation. My name is Puponavot from National Committee of Disaster Management of Cambodia, and I have one inquiry goes to Mrs. Ellen Chin about the seed drift SIDRIF, the Southeast Asia Disaster Risk Insurance Facility. You have mentioned that you have a few, you have a project with a few countries in ASEAN, and it is including Cambodia as well. So I would like to ask you to clarify more about which agency are you working with and what is it going on? Thank you.
Ellen, let me take another question first, and then we're going to entertain this. Right.
Good morning. I'm Jun Runas from the ASEAN Secretariat. My question is directed to Ms. Tin as well. You've in your presentation, there is this ADRFI2 and the CDRIF. How do you propose, since these are parallel initiatives within ASEAN, how do you propose to have them? I mean, is there a complementarity for both of the CDRIF and the ADRFI Phase 2 as to avoid, of course, the duplication of works and resources among members as well as the donor partners in this case? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak. So we have two questions about ARDFI. So I have another one then perhaps, I hope it's not about ARDFI. Yeah. So on the white shirt there, on the left side, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Do Minh Hùng. I come from the Vietnam Disaster Management Authority. Furthermore, thank you very much for organizer to invite us to have opportunity to join with this, I think, very interesting symposium. I think not my question, but how to say, I would like to learn something from our friend from Singapore regarding with insurance. You know that in Vietnam we have a lot of kind of the disaster, and we mobilize a lot of resources to minimize the negative impact of the disaster. But regarding with the insurance issue, in Vietnam now, we still have not yet issued something like a mechanism, like a policy, like a regulation, something regarding with insurance, because you know that the disaster, the high, very, the high risk is very high. So nobody want to how to say to cover insurance of the disaster. So I heard that some experience from our friend from Singapore regarding with this issue. But I think the disaster risk insurance, something regarding with your policy in the tech, something like that, with the enterprise, something. But could you please share with us some your experience a little bit deeper about your experience regarding with this issue? I mean, regarding with the disaster risk insurance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So perhaps we will take the first set of questions very much about the ARDFIs, and perhaps invite Ellen Chin. But other speaker, if you feel that you can contribute into the reflection, the microphone is here, and we can, contribute and complement what Ellen Chin will respond to the first three questions. Ellen?
Yeah. So I think I'll just take these questions together. The first question is about Cambodia's involvement in CDRIF. So to clarify, whilst Laos, Myanmar and Cambodia, while are the initial founding members of the CDRIF Regional Technical Working Group who have pledged to come together to work on feasibility studies towards developing a flood risk pool together with World Bank and other partners. To date, the flood risk pool, which is already active, is only covering Laos and Myanmar as a start, because Cambodia is still in the midst of completing their internal feasibility studies before deciding whether to formally join the flood risk pool. So they are a member of the higher level CDRIF facility, but they are currently not a beneficiary of the flood risk pool, which is the first product sponsored under the facility as yet, pending some internal feasibility studies. So we are working with the Cambodia MOF on this project. And on the second question, yeah, I think we always see ADRIFI and SEADRIF as complementary. If you recall from my slide, ADRIFI covers the upstream activities of risk assessment, which is data and modeling, capacity building, and risk advisory. You need these three upstream activities to happen first before you are in a position to advise or decide on the optimal risk financing solutions downstream. Whether is it a combination of government reserves, insurance, reinsurance, as well as risk pools and cat bonds. So SEADRIF as a regional cat pool is a downstream solution, which is a combination or a result and a consequence of all the upstream activities that will be undertaken by ADRIFI. And that's why they are complementary in that regard. They are not competitive, they are complementary because they occupy different parts of that value chain. And we believe that, with the launch of ADRIFI, a more robust risk assessment and modeling can help point countries to whether or not, a solution like SEADRIF is required further downstream. And the two initiatives will also collaborate together in areas such as capacity building. Already we are talking about working with World Bank and the ADB to do capacity building workshops together for ASEAN member countries. So a lot of synergies and collaborations there. And just to also address the third question, under ADRIFI, we are hoping to cover at least 6 ASEAN member countries. And we hope, we have already identified Laos and Philippines, possibly in the first phase, right? And Myanmar and Thailand, possibly in the second phase. And hopefully Indonesia, Vietnam, and Indonesia and Vietnam can come on board very soon as part of this project. So with that, we can sort of offer more bespoke data assessment and risk advisory solutions specific to Vietnam's exposure. So we are talking to the Vietnam MOF also on this initiative.
Thank you, Lynn. Speaker, you want to add anything? If not, then I open for the second round of... Let me open the second round of questions. I have one on the left, one in the center here. Anybody from the right? So 2 from the left and 1 in the center. Yeah, Pak.
Good morning. My name is Albert Salamanca from the Stockholm Environment Institute. And thanks for the interesting discussion. I was wondering if the panel could reflect on the sort of insurance products we have right now, because what has been presented so far are products addressed for sudden onset events. Yet Pedro Busabi yesterday presented a graph quoting UNSCAP wherein 60% of annual losses in Southeast Asia is on drought, which is a slow onset event. So I wonder, are there insurance products being developed or have been developed or are already being applied addressed towards slow onset events, for example, drought?
Thank you. Let me take another question. And the question going to any specific speakers, or is it from across the board? Okay, thank you. Can I take the question from the center? Okay, then we take it from the left one there. Yeah, but you have a question, right?
Okay, so I guess I can ask a question. Would you like to ask a question? No? Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay, further to the earlier question. So I can see that a lot of presentation talked about the risk and also the financing bit. But how much financing is actually required? One, for instance, like humanitarian aid, and another for disaster. And the second part is that how much of climate change and DRR is being integrated into policy and also investment in Indonesia and also Singapore. I'm very much impressed with the Singaporean presentation. It's really good because we're trying to have something like insurance and also risk assessment in terms of financial back in Malaysia. So I would really appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take another question?
Hi. Hi, good morning. I'm Jermaine from Oxfam. Just a question for Ms. Tahini, but also to the others as well, if it's relevant. Given the point raised about really more focus on emergency response because of visibility and sometimes resources are easier to generate. What do you think are the most critical aspects that we need to do in terms of, for example, as ECHO or as government or as ASEAN, to push for more focus on preemptive, anticipatory, or even risk transfer mechanisms? Because it's a bit uneven across countries in terms of interest, and what's the role that we can actually play on this? Thank you.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes to end this session. Perhaps let me propose this, because the first two questions of the second set is quite relevant and interlinked. The last question here is very much close to what is a critical or reflection that our speaker can say. Perhaps we reserve it as a last word for all speaker to reflect later on. But then we would like to address the first two questions first, and I think it quite relate to all three speakers. So if I may, I would like to invite Mr. Tiny to start to respond to that, and we reserve the last question for reflection or conclusion of the session.
So if I correctly recall, it was about slow onset and resources and insurances. I think that there are resources and schemes that are available for slow onset events. And that was the point which we have also learned, that we need to first agree on protocols and agreed triggers and thresholds and SOPs in order to also see how those different sources can be brought in and embedded into an early action response. So we do believe that there are resources. There's still a lot of unknown aspects of insurance schemes and how we can embed it. So there's work to be done on that regard. And that's what we would like to see with our partners as well. But it's then also that early action, the forecast-based action based on technology, etc., that we can then access those insurance and resources.
Okay, on the slow onset, of course, about the drought, we learned more about the report from the UNSCAP last year, actually. And in this Indonesian case, I think it's going to be good to learn about the experience on the agriculture and also the fisherman insurance, actually, which is now being evaluated, because it's not really working quite well in terms of dealing with the like something like just the compensation, actually, not really having this as for the risk averse, actually, or risk transfer, actually, from the farmers or fisheries to fishermen to the government in this case. So it is now being evaluated, and now it's going to be broaden the spectrum into the cross-sectoral, disaster risk financing and insurance, actually, including with the local government. I think the local government is also need to be very well taken into consideration, how they also be responsible in allocating, actually, some local government money, actually, for their insurance premium in this case.
Right, I'll just briefly touch on the issue of drought insurance and maybe the mixed success that you have seen. In the past, I think usually it's based on, that you face few problems, right? One is adverse selection. Only the riskiest farmers would sign up for it. And there's also the moral hazard problem. Once they are covered, they may not actually feel responsible for taking care of their croplands. So I think in terms of pushing for, a more successful multi-peril crop program, you need a few ingredients. One is public-private partnership. Is there a way for governments and private sectors to work together to construct a more viable and sustainable program? Second is around data. If we shift from an indemnity-based program to an index-based program, and there are a number of weather-based index programs, solutions offered by the market to date, one issue is always basis risk, right? Which is really, what you actually pay out may not actually correlate to the amount of actual losses you sustain. So the issue is really down to data. And can we actually leverage more on satellite or remote sensing, and also Internet of Things, sensors-based technologies to help us capture a more accurate profile of the risk exposures to reduce this basis risk, and that would improve the risk appetite of insurers to offer more meaningful and more cost affordable solutions. So I think it's a multi-pronged effort initiative that needs to be established.
Just to add to that, there is a crowdfunding platform called Cropital. There are a number of startups that are agricultural in nature, and what they do is they make loans to farmers. They put up farms on their website, and anyone in the world can lend money to them, to that particular farm. They'll show you the picture and what kinds of crops it is. It's worked extremely well. So it may be an alternative form of financing, aside from all these other plans, for a farmer to avail of. And it's just a startup company, but it's doing quite well because most of the loans, over 90%, have been repaid.
We have roughly about 5 more minutes, so while reserving the question from Oxfam for the last one, perhaps we take one more last question. If there's a very burning question you have in mind, before we go to Petro, perhaps the last question, please. This is one question from Petro from Swiss Corporation. Can I have the microphone here, please?
Thank you, colleagues. This is a very important subject for Southeast Asia, considering that less of 10% of the assets are insured. How this disaster risk insurance and the existing different programs, EDRIP, CDRIP, and others, are considered by the ASEAN Secretariat and other partners to strengthen and to develop a robust disaster risk insurance for the ASEAN countries. How do you see this as part of maybe the strategy for the coming 5 years? And how can even other partners can contribute to it? Thanks.
Ellen, it looks like it's back to you again. Maybe have a quick one, quick reflection before I come back to the floor for the last question from the Osman. Just bear in mind that we have time limitation, so if you have more questions, the speaker here during tea breaks or lunchtime, we still can bounce idea and have Q&A at the sideline of the event. Eileen, perhaps take a very quick response.
Yeah, just a quick answer. I think in the past there are a number of parallel efforts, fragmented efforts both in public as well as private sector. So ADRIFI and CDRIF aims to be that single coordinating focal point for the region. Okay, now with these initiatives that actually reports to the highest level, to the ASEAN finance ministers, we hope that it would also be able to mobilize and galvanize not just political commitment by the respective government agencies, regulatory bodies, but also with adequate financial resources committed to these efforts. For CDRIF, as you know, Singapore, Japan, we are donors. We continue to work and engage with prospective donors from abroad, and we think that that would set CDRIF up as a sustainable platform. Likewise for ADRIFI, this time round, it's going to be a long-term program, 3-year program in the next phase, again to be funded by Singapore government. We hope that with the political will and support, with adequate financial resources and backing, we can make a difference this time.
Thank you, Eileen. Perhaps now is the time to come back to the question posed by representative from Oxfam, and it actually is about the closing of this session. So perhaps I will give the floor back to the speaker to give a reflection on what is the most critical, what the key message we have so far on this session on how to advance the financial resilience. So very short one. 1 minute takeaway, so everybody can easy to to carry with them when we move to another section. Let me start with Tahini.
Thank you. I think the most critical ones is from a policy, the awareness and acknowledgement and understanding at the policymakers. It was also mentioned yesterday as well. We do need to have that political will and understanding to make it happen, because the risks are known at those most vulnerable, within the most vulnerable communities. But the higher levels are too far away from the ground reality. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very fortunate for having the priority of the disaster and climate resilience on our table now here in Indonesia. And I believe that it will be promoting actually the financing later on, because the insurance and the risk transfer has already been in our plate since the World Bank actually introducing it about 10 years ago, but it's never been moving forward. And now after this is going to be the priority of the development agenda, it will be following up accordingly. And we do hope that learning from the ADRIFI, learning from the CDRIF, maybe the Indonesian government would like to adopt that kind of scheme later on.
I'll just say that disaster risk financing is a multi-stakeholder approach. It's a marathon. It requires us to combine our expertise together, involving science, policy, and finance to crack this persistent challenge that has plagued us for the last few decades. And if in a do-nothing scenario, our economic prosperity and achievements, progress over the last few decades will be rolled back, reset every time a disaster strikes. With every disaster, we hope to level up and gain even more resilience as we learn from our past experiences, right? And fortify ourselves by bending together. So we really hope to do this together. Like, you said, we are stronger together. Thank you.
Just two things. There are institutions such as the businesses and communities for disasters. So that's one resource. The other thing is that we're working with construction companies and the company called Miyamoto to sort of tag buildings and homes in Manila and with construction companies as earthquake, not exactly earthquake proof, but at least earthquake resistant. We believe that people will be more willing to pay higher for their homes and their residences if they have this seal of approval. So if we can get this going, working with the government, with the private sector initiative, it will help in terms of the overall resiliency against earthquakes in the country.
Thank you very much, and I think that everyone here could share with me that we just have a very rich and very educational presentation who come from the four speakers. And we have learned a lot, and I think that a lot of ideas and feedback will help us in working together in building more resilient ASEAN through the how to say the tech say stronger being together. So I think it's please join me to thank all the speakers and for the wonderful session we have this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you once again to our moderator and panelists for this very insightful session. Ladies and gentlemen, now it is time for a coffee break. Before that, several announcements. For Wi-Fi in this building is still the same. It's still ASEAN guests without any password. And also, if you want to go to the toilet is on the right-hand side. So you can just go outside of this room and the toilet will be on the right. So we will be back here for another session at 11 a.m. Enjoy your break.